Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions Wednesday mornings from 9 to 10 o'clock here on WSTU. We talk about some of the things that might affect you in the next month, year, hours, days, whatever the case might be, some of the economic issues that are lurking on the horizon. And we do encourage you to participate if you'd like. If you've got questions or comments, we ask that you kind of keep it civil. But other than that, we don't want to have to send Evan out to enforce this, be the enforcer on this thing. So make sure you keep it civil. But my name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a CPA. Was a banker for about 15 years and also am a licensed community association manager. Not that it makes that much difference, and I have been chief financial officer of a billion-dollar bank, $500 million, somewhere in that range, 600 million, and I had started banks for a living and worked for big CPA firms and small CPA firms, and now have my own CPA firm for the last 25 years or so. So I've had an opportunity, and I consider it an opportunity to see different things and to experience the economics of situations firsthand. Many times in the banking industry, you're on the cutting edge of things that are happening. And that's why it was interesting. It is an interesting business. It's changed now. It's become highly regulated. It's not so much the cutting edge anymore. But that tends to lag. But it still was an interesting process and taught me a lot about economics and not just finance, but the economics of issues and how things work and don't work. And it's one of the things that I think that a lot of people, including myself when I was a lot younger, miss out of our education is the whole economics and to some degree finance. But some of us may have had personal finance in high school, but unless you were an accounting major or finance major, you probably didn't get into finance and accounting in any great depth. You might have had some introductory classes if you were a business major or marketing, but you probably didn't get real deep into accounting or economics in particular. And it is an interesting subject, and the way that it works is kind of it's important to know how it all works. And I'll tell you one of the things that when I was younger. I've always been fairly conservative. I still consider myself to some degree to be a conservative, although I realize, especially with things going on right now with the convention, the Republican convention, and to some degree with the Democratic convention, that I guess I would probably now call myself more of a libertarian than I would call myself a conservative. And you say, well, what's the difference in that? I think, at least in my opinion, right now, the way the Republican Party generally is, and it's also, to some degree, or a large degree, where the Democrat Party is it's largely about government intervention. That government can do things better than the individual. That government has all the answers, the knowledge. That government can solve the problems. And I don't care if you're talking about the far left, or to a large degree some of the far right, the very rigid conservatives. Some of these people who we see now are saying that I'm a conservative but I support Biden or whatever. Well, you're not. Those aren't the same economic principles at all. And certainly you cannot call yourself conservative from an economic standpoint if you support any of the principles of what the Democrat platform is right now, other than government control. And I think that is the common theme. I mean, that's the theme that we've seen in the Trump administration to a large degree. Some of the people who were there for a period of time and left, who were considered to be conservatives, I think they were hired as conservatives, but it turned out that they really were not conservatives. They were probably fascists, or at least far right in terms of government control. That it was that the people still needed to be taken care of, that government needed to step in and solve the problems. I mean, we've got a tremendous debt today because people think government needs to solve the problems. Uh, but fortunately, there are people out there that believe and know that that the answer is that the people can solve the problems. We've always solved our problems, and that's the good thing about the United States of America is that uh, people, if they want to succeed, I'm a member of Martin County Business Exchange, and this morning we have our meetings on Wednesday morning from 7:30 to roughly 9 o'clock, 8:45, somewhere in that range, and our speaker this morning was Gail Goldie, and I tell you, it was she currently works for eye care sells for eye care magazine, which many of you have seen it. They show they portray different businesses and they have kind of what you would call advertorial type pieces, where you go in there and it's about the owner and their business, but kind of talks about their background things. But it was interesting that to listen to Gail. And by the way, because MCB does the radio show in the evenings on Wednesdays, usually the speaker, and I think that tonight Gail will be on somewhere around 5. So you might want to catch her show today because she might recap that. But um, it was amazing the background she grew up in, the uh, situations that she faced as a woman in the workforce. Her mom and dad, immigrants. In fact, she was saying that um, her mom actually um, worked for the governor of New York in the day. I think it was her mom. Might have been her grandmother. No, I think it was her mom. And there was a situation where the it was during Prohibition, so maybe it was her grandma. Anyway, it was during Prohibition, and she worked directly for the governor. Her grandfather worked as a chauffeur for the governor of New York, but it was during that period of time from 1920 to 1933, during the Prohibition era, and Gail's grandmother was Irish and spoke Gaelic and the whole bit. But anyway, she was during that period of time while she was in the governor's office. She made a very successful business, in effect, being a bootlegger. To the politicians that would come into the governor's office. She ultimately got arrested at some point, did some probation for that. But it was interesting that you go back to to her family and some of the things that they dealt with, and they always kept coming back, and they came here because they believed in this country and the ability of people to succeed on their own, to make a way if they were willing to work hard. And like Gail was saying, as a woman, you initially faced quite a few obstacles, but she was very, very successful in a number of different things that she did. Rose to the ranks of regional distribution and sales managers, and had a bunch of people working for her. Traveled all over the country, doing that type of activity, and always stepping up, even though she didn't have any unusual superpowers or anything, and she didn't have the government behind her giving her support. She went out and saw what she wanted to do, and she did it. And so it's amazing. You hear those stories all the time, and you can, sometimes the conventions make us think about it because they always focus on it, but those aren't, we sometimes think those are isolated stories, and yet here's a person, everybody, she's just a regular person here in town. She can tell you her story, and it's just amazing what her background was. You know, she had the I think her dad was a longshoreman, worked there, part of the union, but very pro America. In fact, she was saying that that he would not buy a product that was not made in the USA. He would not buy it. He did not allow anybody to buy it. He didn't want them to buy it. They didn't buy it. Everything from cars to shoes to anything else had to be made in America. And it wasn't in those days made in China. It might have been made in Czechoslovakia. It might have been made in someplace else. But you bought made in America. You didn't buy anything else. And so it was kind of interesting because he even understood that, that American jobs were dependent upon that. And people needed that opportunity. The people in the longshoremen needed that opportunity. And the people that were out there needed that opportunity. So it was kind of interesting. But I think it's kind of interesting that all of these stories, there's all of these opportunities. It's and everybody, it's not like it's just one or two people, and it's not just it's any particular race or religion or whatever. It's there's stories out there of everybody that's succeeded. And there's stories out there of people that have failed. And it's important that there are people out there that have had failures, because we learn more from our failures than our successes sometimes. But you live in a truly free enterprise, a free market, a free country. And that's the big thing, a free country. You live in a truly free country when you're allowed to fail, when the government doesn't step in and protect you because they think you need protection. Sometimes you need to experience failure to experience success. Anybody that's been out there in the world working for any period of time understands that if you don't ever experience failure, you will never truly experience success. And that's something to keep in mind. You might have success, but you will never truly experience success because you never fully understand what the alternative was. But when you have failed, when you have lost, you will understand what the success really means. And that's what we have in America, is the ability to really experience success, because we also have the ability to experience failure. And until you have that situation, you will not truly be free. And I say this is an economics show, and here's the economic statement. That's true 100% in economics. It's almost brutal in economics that if you have a free market, you are free to succeed and you are free to fail. The market is, the market regulates, not the government, not anyone individual. It is the market itself that regulates. And that can be very, very painful. And that can be brutal. It can be devastating in some cases. But again, it can also give you the opportunity to get back up and say, you know what? I did it wrong. I'm going to do it over again. I'm going to do it right this time. And I'm going to go after it. And I'm going to give it all I can. And I'm going to succeed. I'm going to succeed this time. And I can tell you, because I've been there myself, that when you succeed, when you experience that success, it is so much greater when you've experienced the other side of that, when you've experienced the failure, the loss, whatever it is. And that's true in economics, and it's true in life. I think that, everything from, I early in my career, I moved up pretty quickly. At 24 years of age, 26 years of age. At 26 years of age, I was chief financial officer of a $600 million bank. Now that's a large bank, and in those days, that was a very large bank. It would have been I think it was because we didn't have any kind of branch bank or any kind of branch banking or any kind of other types of banking in Florida at the time. And so that that put me at, as far as independent banks go, that was I think the second or third largest independent bank in the state of Florida at the time. And so, I was 26 years old. So, I had these successes, and then, I had some periods of personal situations. I lost a child, got stuck in a job because of where I was at, got stuck in a job uh, that I couldn't get out of. Ended up ultimately losing the job, had to stay here for other personal reasons. And so, it kind of narrowed the focus. There's not a lot of CFO jobs for billion-dollar banks locally in Palm Beach County or Martin County at the time, and it was Palm Beach County then. So I experienced some very, very difficult times, some losses, some failures. But I can tell you this: after the loss of a child, I had my daughter at the time, but after a loss of a child, when my son was born, there was nothing that was as great as experiencing that. Once you've lost a child, a son, and now you have you're fortunate enough to have a child, you know, it's much greater to have that type of feeling of, geez, I realized what I had lost before, and now, God's graced me with a child, another child, and I have two, and it's great, and it's been, and now looking back, and I've got grandkids, and it's a fantastic experience. But I'm not sure I would appreciate that as much. I know I have a great appreciation for my own family and my own kids, and I have a great appreciation for and my grandkids, and I have a great appreciation for others who have gone through the same situation, who have lost children, who have tried to have children, and have had problems. And I have an immense amount of respect for those who wanted children and couldn't have them, because I know how hard that is and what they've missed out on, and so it's and the struggle that they've gone through. So, but I again, back to what I was getting at is that, at this point it's all about, when you look at the economic situation is exactly the same. When you if you're not allowed to if you're not allowed to fail, then you are not allowed to, um, then you won't really appreciate success. And more importantly, you won't change the way you approach uh, a problem going forward. In other words, you won't learn from your mistakes. Uh, if you do something that's really not right, that doesn't make sense, or that's not what the market wants or whatever, and and somebody softens the blow, they may think that they are being compassionate, and that's kind of I have respect for some of the Democrats on the side of, this on the side of socialism and communism, is because I think that some of them, not all of them, but I think some of them come from a side of, they think that they're being compassionate. They think that they're being compassionate because they are protecting you or giving you something. But in reality, what they're doing is limiting you. They're telling you you can only be this good. You're not capable on your own. You can't stomach the failure. You can't handle the success. Here's what I'm going to give you, and this is all I'm going to give you. This is you could have this, but you can't have this other stuff. That you just can't have. That's not possible. But we can give you this. We can make sure that you can continue to work 40 hours a week and slave for some wage that is maybe not a great wage, and you'll never get rich, but you will at least be able to maybe survive. We can give you this. You can go to school, but we can't guarantee you can go to whatever school you want. We can give you these things, and they're going to decide. And I think that sometimes they think that they're helping you. I mean, when you look at some of this, some of the things that have happened to certain, certain groups of people in our history, um, when people have tried to protect those people, uh, I think that, what they're doing is saying you're not capable on your own. You can't be successful. And we won't let you fail because it would be too devastating for you. You would never rebound. But when we look at our history, and we're a history of immigrants, look at what's happened. We have not protected most of the immigrants that have come to this country, and they have failed. Many of them slaved, worked. They were indentured servants. They did all kinds of things um, that were very, very horrendous, and they weren't given that opportunity, but they fought for that opportunity. And frankly, the United States, the good thing about this place is we ultimately learn from our mistakes, and that opportunity is there. It's amazing to me that uh, here in the month of August, we are, we are celebrating suffrage for women. I mean, think about it. It's only been 100 years that women had the right to vote, which is just crazy, right? 100 years that women had the right to vote. Um, but what's also amazing is that women were suppressed, and couldn't have credit and everything else up until the 70s. And yet look at how many successful women we have, and some now very, very successful women in a number of areas, in business, and in the area of finance, and in the area of politics, and also just in the area of life. I'm fortunate to know a few strong women that I'm associated with, and that I've had an opportunity to be involved with, and it's not as much as what amazes me is how strong they are, um, individually. They don't allow themselves to be pushed around. They don't allow themselves to be forced or taken advantage of. They have the ability to, and they have the gumption to stand up and say, "Hey, I am who I am, and I'm doing it the way I think is right." And it's amazing that we suppress that, but even over all those years, and even now, it's allowed those people. It's allowed many, many women to be much stronger and much more successful, because in general, over a period of time, they've experienced the other side of that, and they were not protected. They were not allowed. They were not protected. They were property. Let's face it. Women, for most of the time in this country, were considered property, chattel. They were not cattle, chattel, which meant that they were owned by their husband. They didn't have rights. They couldn't borrow money. They couldn't sign contracts. They couldn't do any of the things financially. They weren't allowed to do that stuff. They were, um, because they were property, and but they fought through all of that, and to the point that I think that most people would agree that in this day and age, if we hadn't had the contribution of women to business, to politics, to anything you want to talk about, uh, we would not, as a country, be where we are now. And it certainly has changed uh, the freedoms that we have in America, and we how we treat other people, how we treat other countries, and how we operate from that standpoint. And it's a major, major factor. So I guess what I was getting at is that I like I like the whole process of being a what I would call a libertarian, because I do believe that that people have the right to decide for themselves. that means they have the right to fail, and sometimes that failure um, can be devastating. Sometimes it can involve death. It can involve losing everything, can involve being killed. There's a lot of things that that if you talk about when people exercise their individual freedoms, um, they also accept the risks of making those decisions. But again, in the whole thing, that is a good thing because um, it is important for you as a people and for your kids and for people you're friends with to understand what what happens and to my mom used to always tell me that at least I was a good lesson of what not to do. She that was a common thing she would say. Mark, at least you're a good example of what not to do. So, but sometimes that's what we are. That's why we have to go through this because sometimes it's not about us. Sometimes we are a good example of what not to do. And sometimes we are a good example of what to do. For example, Gail Goldie is a good example of what you can accomplish if you continue to go after it, and continue to push forward. She's an example of what you can get. There are examples of what happens uh, when cut corners, when you do things that are wrong. Um, you know, uh, uh, Bernie Madoff is a good example of what happens when you cheat. You should go to jail. You should serve a lot of time. You should suffer because you've hurt a lot of people. And so people need to see that there are consequences, punishments, consequences, failures, whatever you want to call it, that come with your decisions. Because otherwise, you make bad decisions in the future. I've talked about the banking industry. One of the problems we've got right now in this country is that we do not have a solid financial system to handle and to take care of uh, what we need to do to expand business, to expand growth, and to grow in the economy. The economy has been stimulated, but it can't constantly be by government money. It has to be by money that's comes from your own wealth. You have to put your own money at risk. Sometimes that's borrowing money when you don't always have a lot of collateral. And that is putting that at risk, putting your reputation at risk, putting your name at risk, and potentially, risking bankruptcy and losing it all. But today in this economy, we don't have that source, and because first of all, a lot of that money was not provided in the government sector. It was provided in the private sector through banks, many of them community banks. We lost the savings and loan industry, which used to provide a lot of personal one-on-one type of lending for buying homes. They don't really exist anymore. That market now is completely dominated by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are government controlled and government funded agencies. So that has gone away. So now the government controls housing, residential housing. It controls investment housing, which means that it also controls rentals because it controls the money that people would borrow to be able to buy a house to rent out to someone. It controls all of that. On the business side, a large portion of the business market, even before the pandemic, was from the SBA. It was SBA guarantees. It wasn't direct lending by the SBA. It was SBA guarantees. Well, the fact of the matter is, the SBA right now is, it's just loaned, billions of dollars out to businesses to save them. They're not they're not going to be eager to put out a few more billion. They've already kind of used up some of that. And at the same time, the banks aren't going to go on the hook, especially now because they know the economy is not that great. So, and what's interesting is there's not as many small banks left. And so they don't have to loan to Stuart, Florida. Here's the problem when you consolidate banks and when the strong get stronger and the small go away. When the local community bank, and I'm talking now not a bank that's $10 billion that spans 3/4 of the state of Florida. I'm talking about the little bank that used to be on the street corner and had a couple branches in town, and that was it, right? So if the times get tough, they may not want to lend to you, but they don't have a choice. They have to lend the money because if they don't lend the money, they lose money. That's the thing people don't realize. If they don't lend the money, they lose money. They can put it into bonds or whatever, but they don't make they don't make any money on that. That will not be enough to cover their overhead expenses. They can charge you some fees, but that still is not going to be enough because at that point you are their market. You can't go and start doing loans in New York and do loans in Chicago or wherever. You're going to have to do loans in Stuart. So you're going to find a way to deal with those customers. Whereas if I'm a large bank, even these regionals, if I'm a large bank, I have a lot of alternatives. I can loan money to Germany if I want. I can loan money to Turkey if I want. I can loan money to Spain if I want. I can loan money to China, I guess, if I want. So I've got a lot of choices. And so why should I loan money? Why should I potentially loan money to some small business in Stuart, Florida that may go out of business when I can loan money to Spain? I don't think Spain's going out of business. May not be able to pay me, which they haven't been able to pay any of their debts for years. But at least, I've got a better chance of getting the money back. I don't know how they figure that. You can't repossess Spain, but anyway. So what happens is as those small banks go away, as they no longer are there to provide that local focus, what happens is Stuart money gets deposited and goes somewhere else and supports somebody else. So what happens is that if we protect those large banks because they're too big to fail, as we did in 2007 and 8, if we say they're too big to fail and we protect them, what we do is we make them stronger so that the community bank, small community banks, the regional community banks can no longer compete because now those banks can afford to take bigger risks and can afford to lose money because if they lose money, they're not going to go out of business. But if your local bank, if that little Stuart bank that has 2 branches, if it loses money because the economy goes down for a period of time and they have losses, trust me, that bank's going to be out of business. So now they can't compete. They can't take the risk that the big banks can take because the big banks know that they have the U.S. government behind them, that the government will save them if they make mistakes. So since they can't experience failure, they ultimately will never experience true success because they will continue to do what they've been doing in the past. They will continue to take the risks that they've done in the past, and they will not learn from them because you don't learn. I can tell you what, I've learned a lot from risks I've taken that, ended up in me being unemployed, having to take another job, having to, find some other way to get money, for being in debt. I have learned a lot from that. I have learned from other people's experience in that area, but I have also learned from my own. And so as a result, I'm not going to do that again. There are certain things I'm not going to do again. I kind of kiddingly said at a commission meeting, somebody said something about, well, you could always build a parking garage on your property. I've been through that. I mean, I haven't built one, but I've been through the whole process. I'm not doing that. I understand what the risks are. That cost me a ton of money. And I understand what the risks are of something like that. So, so I, kiddingly said, I've, been there, done that, not doing it again. And that is, in a nutshell, that is what a free enterprise system does. It allows you to been there, done that, not doing it again, or been there, done that. Yeah, I think I'll do that. Um, and it's the ability to try that and have the opportunity to do that that gives us the ability to be successful. And so, yeah, I think that from an economic and business and government standpoint, I believe, frankly, that the more opportunity people have to fail, the more opportunity they have to succeed. I love these stories of I love these stories that you hear in the conventions. I love the stories of the failures, the things that have happened, and how people have come back from that. Everything from the 9/11 stories to you know uh, the uh, the Nikki Haley and her stories about being an immigrant's daughter, and having to experience some of the prejudice that occurred, all of those kind of things. Um, and it's just kind of and there's stories like that to some degree on the other side, and on the Democrat side, although they don't we don't they don't seem to tend to focus on that right now. But there are those successes. There are those people. Um, you know, One I thought was pretty interesting was from the Democrat side, was Congressman Lewis, who experienced being beaten for his beliefs, being but we didn't protect him by saying, you can't do that anymore, or you're not going to. I mean, he continued to go out there and put his life at risk, along with Martin Luther King, um, as a compassionate, nonviolent. If you want to actually look at nonviolent demonstrations from the viewpoint of the demonstrators, go look at Martin Luther King's demonstrations. There were a lot of violence, but never on his part. You know, they were the ones that were being persecuted, and that process led to a much better country. Um, and so you have to admire people like that, who have gone out there, who have not been protected and have fought for their rights, and in many cases were beaten, some killed, um, and yet, um, you understand then, when these people who have gone through this, how much they appreciate the successes that they've had. Here he's, at this point now, a congressman. He was a congressman, and has had a significant impact on the country itself. Um, Nobody has had a bigger impact on race issues in the United States than Martin Luther King. And you look at some of that, and you look at the things that he'd gone through, and he never asked the government to protect him. He just asked the government to change. And he was, and it's an amazing story. And there's a lot of those kind of stories out there. Um, was he successful? If he had gone out, and the first protest or the first demonstration that they did, peaceful demonstration, the government said, "Well, for you, we're gonna take care of this," and then didn't really change, but just kind of threw him a bone and said, "Well, okay, here, we're gonna let this go." Had that confrontation not taken place, had that violence not taken place, that failure from the standpoint of the government's failure to respond had not taken place, the successes of MLK, and of course, he gave up everything, including his life, for those things. So, that's the opportunity that we have in the United States, is that we have the opportunity to succeed or fail, um, to move from adversity to success, to experience the downs in life, but to also experience the great successes, and to experience, as Martin Luther King said, his dream, and he helped make that dream possible in the United States, as have many, many, many other people. His is probably an easy success story because we're all pretty much familiar with it. But there are the everyday success stories of a number of different people. The Gail Goldies of the world, who grew up, and made a way in a what was primarily a male dominated world, and has been successful over the years. But she didn't experience those successes right away. Her parents, who were immigrants, and made their way. They were not given an opportunity initially. They went out and they worked, and they made a life for their family. Um, I would say, I think most of us could look to a fairly big success story. For most of us, for many of us, our parents. You can look at your parents, and say, and look at what they did, or your grandparents. But in my case, my parents were ordinary people. My dad didn't make a lot of money. He was a salesperson for uh, he worked on a commission. As many people that are in the sales world know, that as soon as you start making any decent money on a commission, they find out a way to make your commission less. They go direct. So he experienced all of those kind of things. No matter what. And he worked hard, but we never had a lot of money. I wouldn't have gone to college if it weren't for the fact that I had to borrow money to go to college. But I did borrow money, but it was there. I had to work my way through college. I didn't get scholarships. I got the Pell Grant at one point, but people may remember that was a very small amount of money, and I paid for all of my other college expenses by going, by working in the dish room, washing dishes. And I worked 20 to 25 hours a week, as well as going to class, um, uh, washing dishes, so that I could go to college, because I wanted a degree. I wanted to be an attorney. I wanted to be a CPA. I wanted an opportunity. And I felt like if I could get an education, I would have an opportunity. And my parents worked very, very hard to make that happen. Even though they didn't have a lot of money, they worked very hard uh, to do that. And I considered them my success story, because I looked at how hard, and I didn't appreciate it when I was growing up, until now I'm an adult, having to try to do the same thing for my family. And you don't appreciate sometimes. But I look at how hard they worked to give me a better life, not to give them a better life. They knew that they were never going to have, my dad wasn't going to own the businesses he worked for. He wasn't going to, I mean, at one point he actually had thought about and thought about starting a business. But again, without those resources, without that, he didn't have that opportunity. He gave me the opportunity ultimately by getting me helping me get an education, get to school, not end up in jail and all those kind of things. And so, I've had that opportunity to have a business, but he made that possible. And my mom made that possible by, taking care of the kids, and taking care of us, and making sure that we went to school and we did our homework and we did all of that while my dad was traveling around. And so, you don't think that but my parents went through some, they went through some horrible situations. My dad lost a job at one point at 60 years of age. He lost a job with no pension. Um, and was it discrimination? Absolutely. He was discriminated. It was age discrimination. But unfortunately, you know, there wasn't a lot of recognition of that at the time. And so he wasn't able to, he had to kind of start life over at 60. I go back to the time, my mom, had some illnesses. She had hypoglycemia that wasn't diagnosed in those days. So they diagnosed her as having psychiatric problems. She spent, when I was a child, she spent a year in a psychiatric hospital. Um, I remember she used to always tell me, she's a great lady, but she used to always tell me, "Look, I don't know about you guys, but I'm the only person that I know that's got something saying I'm not crazy," because they finally told her that she had hypoglycemia and that it wasn't a mental issue; it was just her. But you know, but that was devastating for her and for my family, and you know, but they picked up and they kept going, and my mom and dad, you know, they had I think 6 or 8 kids in total, yet only 2 of us survived, my brother and I, and in fact, I had another brother and sister that lived for a short period of time after birth, but then died within a few weeks. Having been there and lost a child myself, I know how devastating that was, and to go through that uh, uh, that many times, and trust me, a miscarriage is the same as you have the child and you lose a child after they're born. It's the same thing. You've already bonded with that child, particularly when you want a child that bad, and people don't sometimes understand that, but so that loss. So when I was born, I'm the oldest, and my brother is 4 years younger, and there was a baby in between, but that lived for a little while and then died. So when I was born, my parents were ecstatic. You know, they really loved, and was I overprotected? Yeah, probably, but I can understand that, and I can understand how happy they were when they finally got that child and the child lived. When my brother was born, 4 years later, the same thing, and because I knew how bad that they wanted children, and so like I say, until you've experienced some of those losses, could somebody have said, should the government have stepped in and said, you know what, you just probably aren't really suited to have children. You may lose 2 more, 3 more. So we're just not going to allow you to conceive anymore. It's too expensive, the cost involved in you could have a child that's got some kind of an illness. We're just not going to let you conceive anymore. We're going to protect you because that's just too emotionally draining. We're just not going to allow you to go through this again. That's what I'm getting at. And so then they could say, well, you can adopt, right? You can adopt. Well, but my mom wanted to have a baby. She had gone through birth. And she wanted to have a baby. She wanted to have a family. My parents originally wanted to have a big family, but so, I know that I know that my brother and I were wanted, and I know that we were loved. It's because I know what they experienced as I got to be an adult and found out what happened. I got to understand the experience of loss. And so when I lost a child, I had at least had a family member who had gone through that. It didn't make it easier, but at least I knew that you could still move on and get through it. I had that base. So that's kind of what it's about. I mean, that's what we're dealing with right now. That ability to make a choice. I don't need. I need to experience those failures because I'm a stubborn guy. Some of those, and I think we all need to experience that so that we will truly appreciate the successes that come from our efforts. Anyway. That's what I wanted to talk about this morning. I appreciate you listening in. Every Wednesday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock after my Martin County Business Exchange, we talk about a few things here. Listen tonight to Gail. She's on. Maybe you can call in and talk to her about a few things right here on WSTU Digital 1450 or Martin County's Heritage Station.